Hi, my name is Spencer. I'm a video editor living in England. As you might tell from my voice, I'm not originally from there. I grew up in California and I miss my family very much. So much, in fact, that I regularly stay up pretty late on Friday nights so I can see them through video calls. And to keep myself occupied while waiting for the calls to begin, I decided to start live streaming some acoustic virtual concerts a little while back. Music, however, is something that I am relatively unskilled at, so I decided to put my video editing skills to use and at the very least make my live streams a little nicer in one way or another. I've been treating it as practice, a portfolio piece to shove in the face of the people who don't acknowledge my high-quality Facebook posts. You know who you are. So here's the mission statement. Improve my music live streams and build my portfolio by coming up with an aesthetic and building motion graphics to support it. Let's go. Immediately after my campfire theme stream the week before, I was doing some file taxonomy and discovered that OBS can in fact handle transparency without needing to jump through all the hoops I jumped through last time. That kicked off my thinking on this theme. I decided for this week to come up with a kind of piratey, adventure-y look. Partially because I wanted a chance to sing sea shanties, and partially because it's very close to the first anniversary of my novel's publishing date. When I was 18 and working at the YMCA, I wrote a 95,000-word book called Down by the Sea during all my lunch breaks. It was an anthology of stories surrounding a small group of found family privateers exploring the local folklore and culture of an island town they were marooned on. Honestly, I forget about this book constantly, and I'm not going to pretend it's the pinnacle of literature. Boat Jesus, Melee swore, but decided not to test him on it lest they break out in another bout of improvisational math jazz. Precocious isn't a word. Did you know that seagulls are actually called seabirds? But it's an achievement, and according to my therapist, I need to be proud of that. So I got to work on the advertisement. The week prior, I had already done the work of modeling and animating an ad using Blender, Clip Studio Paint, and After Effects. I spent a reasonable chunk of time on it, and I intended to reuse it as often as possible, as is my prerogative. I opened the After Effects file and began altering the text to reflect the theme and changing the grade on it to amplify the colors, as I felt that was more appropriate for the subject matter. Once that was done, I exported it, forgot to post it, and went to bed. The next day, I got started on modeling. I had very limited time to work on this particular project due to other obligations I had, so I decided the overall aesthetic more or less in a rush. I knew straight away that I didn't want this to be photorealistic, so I got to work modeling a wonky-looking pirate ship. I'm not a particularly strong modeler, but I believe it's important to practice, and considering that I am the sole undertaker of this project, it didn't feel right to use someone else's boat model, even if it is objectively better than mine in terms of sculpture style and usability. Eventually, I finished up something I felt was palatable. I hit the ocean button and began experimenting with the composition. One of the problems I've encountered with working in certain areas of Blender is getting them to loop properly or inconspicuously. For many things, it can just be a question of setting the value to be the same at the beginning and the end of the timeline, but for the ocean modifier, that usually results in it looking like it goes forwards, slows down, and then plays in reverse. This is not inconspicuous, so I had to experiment with other settings like wave height and size to hide it. Once I was relatively satisfied with the ocean, I threw clouds in the scene. I used these last time for the advertisement, but since this didn't have to be photorealistic, that meant I could use them here as well. With the cloud set up, the last thing I wanted to do was make a small island with a palm tree and a treasure chest on top of it. I flattened a sphere and made a tree from a cylinder, then made rudimentary leaves out of planes. It was at this point that I remembered that you actually have to texture things when working in 3D. I threw a quick beige color on the tree and began combing the internet for pictures of palm tree leaves. One of the nicest things about working in non-photorealistic styles, especially with 3D stuff, is that you can just abuse other programs to make photoreal stuff look stylized in whatever style you need it for. After finding an image of a palm tree leaf, I took it into Adobe Illustrator and applied an image trace to it. This was partially to give it a very vector-y type look, and partially to give it a higher resolution. I took the image and brought it into my open source image editor Glimpse and cut away at all the white pixels, then blurred the entire thing slightly so the edges wouldn't be sharp. I brought the texture into Blender, forgot how to make images transparent for about 5 minutes, and then altered the colors a little bit to make it fit a more saturated color scheme. After animating the leaves, I got to work on giving the boat appropriate colors. Suddenly, I realized I wasn't happy, and not in an existential way for once. I fiddled some more with the motion of the ocean and decided to get a jump start on compositing with freestyle. Freestyle is the name of one of the high schools I attended in California, and if you are an artistically inclined student or the parent of one in the Mountain View Los Altos School District, I cannot recommend it enough. Freestyle is also the name of a tool in Blender that draws outlines on top of your image during your render. It is, at its core, a compositing tool, which is something I knew I could rely on. I am, at my core, far better at video compositing than I am at anything in Blender. It's still 3D, it's just that one of the dimensions is different. I eventually finagled Freestyle to give me an outline in a style I felt was pleasing, and I got started on giving out more materials. I reused the grass texture I used for the advertisement and decided to change up the clouds. With the clouds legally distinct and definitely not a drag and dropped asset anymore, I began modeling the treasure chest. It was miraculously easy because I decided to not do a good job. It was 3 p.m. and starting to get dark outside, so my circadian rhythm told me I was tired. I got to work putting some late touches on it. I adjusted the lighting and added in some gold coins to the treasure chest. I added in some textures and tweaked a few others. This is another instance of me abusing presets and other image editors. I took a photorealistic tree trunk texture for the palm tree, stylized it in Glimpse, and used it as a texture in Blender. I did the same process for another wood texture I was using, colored the ocean real quick, and then let it render. While it was rendering, I accidentally left my recording software on, so you get to be treated to an exciting look of what that looks like, as well as an instance of me pulling up an episode of I Think You Should Leave so I could take a picture of something.
Yeah, I was doing this all the time, and the wear and tear was wrecking my regular shirts. But TC Tuggers has this little knob on the front so you don't wreck your shirt or hurt your hand.
Once the first render was done, I did another pass that only rendered out the freestyle version of the boat for my compositing purposes. While I had the main screen for my stream more or less finished, I wanted to include a separate one that I could switch up to every once in a while to keep it from getting monotonous. I decided, since I have a tendency to screw up while I'm playing, believe me, it's sublime, oh every turn, every time, to have a screen that says silly boy while little buoy bobs up and down. That way, whenever I make a reprimandable enough goof, I could switch over and adequately punish myself. First, I positioned the camera and hit the ocean button, and then I had to design the buoy. This was a bit of a weird task. I think anyone who's ever felt the sea breeze gently caress their hair has a different conception of what a buoy looks like. Mine comes from Finding Nemo, but if I'm doing a pirate theme, I have to stick with something that at least looks contemporaneous. I found a reference, modeled something that looked close enough, said close enough, and dropped it into the water. Here again, I run into my issue of trying to make a seamless loop. I'm still getting used to 3D animating in general, and learning about what things I can and cannot keyframe whilst working in Blender is definitely an important part of that. For example, I cannot keyframe the random generation seed for the ocean, but I can attach it to something else that I can keyframe using nodes. I learned and struggled for a little while, but it had been dark for around 3 hours by then, so I was inclined to take a break and even out my work-life balance a little. Eventually, I got something that was close enough, said close enough, and went to bed. The next morning, I realized the extent to which I would have to composite the project, and I decided to get a little bit silly with it. It was time to make my AFK screen, something I could put up when I needed to take a break or grab some water or scream into the night. In a new Blender file, I dropped in an image of some parchment and appended the cloud file I had been using earlier to make it look like an animated coffee stain. See, in the cloud material, there's a certain part of the material that's up to randomness. This is to generate the shape of the cloud itself, and it can technically be set to any number you'd want. However, in the tutorial, the person who made it advised setting it to the cloud's location so that every cloud put into the scene would look different simply by virtue of having moved away from the cloud it was copied from on one or two axes. I like to use this factor to make the clouds look animated yet loop somewhat seamlessly. I can set the starting location to be one value, the ending location to be the same value, and then move it slightly for the middle. This works because I can move it in a small enough increment that the randomness of the position doesn't generate a completely new cloud, it just slightly alters the previous value in a random way. Then it looks like the cloud is just changing on its own, but not obscenely fast and not noticeably enough for people to recognize that it's looping unless they're looking for it. Now, in a new Blender file, I dropped in an image of the world map for the location my book takes place in. I zoomed in on a random point and used grease pencil to draw around it in a map-like style. Once I had something I was happy with, I moved forward a few frames and pushed it around in edit mode to make it look slightly different. Then, I used grease pencil's interpolation to animate the difference between the two different keyframes and set it to an interval which I figured would be satisfying to watch. After I had finished animating the land, I threw in a satisfying looking curve to connect to the X. I moved it forward another few frames and pushed it around in edit mode, but decided not to interpolate it this time because it would look more visually interesting if I didn't. Now that I was playing with grease pencil, I realized I could add just one more touch to some of the other screens before I moved away from modeling and into compositing. I decided to draw some quick animations of a bird flying into the distance. Normally, I would spend a lot of time playing with the difference between keyframes here to see if I could change the weight or emphasis of the animation by shifting around the time frames by which certain actions or movements took place. The space between keyframes fascinates me, but it would have to fascinate me later because it was 11 a.m. on Friday and the sun was starting to go down. I copied the keyframes and movements of the bird twice over, then scattered it throughout the timeline to come up with a reasonably nice looking set of movements that didn't get too repetitive. Now it was time to composite. I opened After Effects and began importing everything in. I began looking for the reference image of my stream that I could use to balance colors, then realized that I had misplaced it, so I opened up Premiere Pro to look at the timeline for my video designing a campfire. Then I found it and brought it into After Effects so I could get to work. After bringing everything in and setting the frame rate, I got to work dropping it all in the same timeline. This wasn't particularly hard to do because there were only 3 things to bring in. I got to work attempting to blend the various assets together. I added a dark oval shape beneath the water to make it look deep instead of transparent, and relegated the sketchy freestyle export to only include the area around the ship, as there were multiple stray lines that shot across the screen. While they were intentional, I wanted them to stay within a specific area. With that done, I got to work designing a gradient for everything. I decided to make it yellowish off towards where the sun was because I thought it was an interesting touch. I made it blue and dark blue for the other corners, and then began thinking about how I could spruce up other parts of the image. I decided to give the gold coins a bit of a glimmer, partially because I thought it would look good, and partially because I knew if I overdid it, I could use it to cover up some flaws I noticed with the rest of the image. I decided to give a little something to every other corner as well. I added a light ray gleaming onto the leaves to indicate the extent to how shiny the gold is. I fiddled with the gradient some more, electing to use it to cover some dead space I noticed frequently on the side of the camera. Then I made the clouds a little more glowy. I added another gradient on top of it all so as to tie the rest of the image together. Once that was done, it was the ship's turn to get a little bit of a makeover. I liked how flickery and idiosyncratic the freestyle lines looked, so I decided to step it up by selectively adding some film damage to where the ship was. This would make it look like an old-timey, dramatic-looking movie, which I felt suited the flicker and coloration of that corner compared to the rest of the image. I moved on to the Silly Boy screen. This one was similarly easy. I dragged in my assets and applied some darkness here and there. I felt like Silly Boy wasn't a searing enough indictment of my personal lack of skill, so I decided to throw in a bit of a harsher insult as well. I added in a vignette, applied some lightness here and there, and moved on. I added the birds into both the main overlay and the Silly Boy one, and got started on the map. On Google Images, I grabbed some more parchment, then used my old Adobe Illustrator to glimpse trick to make a nicer asset for myself to use. I then adjusted my map to fit and threw in the clouds. I decided I wanted to do something a little extra with the clouds and use them as a displacement map. A displacement map is a fancier application of one of the black equals 0, white equals 1 concepts I went over last time. It references an image or a video, and then depending on the value of a corresponding pixel, it will displace chunks of other pieces of video. I figured that since the land itself was wiggling a little on the map, it would look cool if the paper was kind of shifting as well. Once I accomplished that, I used the clouds to make coffee stains and then exported it. Then I opened up Blender again. Oh, sorry, what's that? You thought we were done making assets? Well, we are. This is still compositing. This is super compositing. I attached the map video onto a plane in Blender, gave it a cloth simulation, and then made a short animation of it dropping onto a table. I added flickering lights and made sure that the map texture, and the camera movement looped seamlessly from 40 frames to 290 frames, so that I wouldn't have to constantly replay the part where it drops to begin with. When I finished, I exported it in 3 passes, one with the map and the table it lands on, one with just the map, and one with just the table. Then I took a break to film a music video with my 3 identical twin brothers before the sunlight ran out. When I got back, it was time for more super compositing. I brought the map and table into After Effects separately and added a fast cloud texture underneath the map but above the table to simulate the look of dust being blown away as the map dropped. Frankly, I think that it's probably the best, cleanest, and most satisfying part of this entire endeavor, so I'm glad I did it. I tried to experiment with some moving 3D text, but let's just say there's a reason I do my 3D stuff in Blender and not After Effects. I scrapped it and moved on to the quality of life changes, squashing some bugs and issues and starting to set things up. Once all of that was done, I designed the LUTs and got ready for the stream. My feet are buried in the sand, and there's a breeze, a breeze, a breeze, a breeze. There's a shadow, you can't see my eyes. And the sea is just a wetter version of the skies. And hey, it was a pretty nice stream. I was, unfortunately, more than a little tired by this point, but I got a chance to try some things and play some songs I hadn't played before, and I'm grateful for the experience. And, in the end, I once again got my OBS broadcast to work on the video call, so my whole family could see what a silly little boy I am. Before I close, some final thoughts. If I were to do anything differently, I probably would have done more pre-production work. I was more or less putting this project off until the last 2 days because I knew I could get it done in that amount of time, but this stopped me from doing some of the stuff I did previously, like thinking more in depth about the theme and finding a more stable aesthetic to go with. I feel as though my models were lacking in coherence and consistency to an extent, with each different one having a new effect or bloom being put on them to compensate. While that might work fine for a one-off overlay, I don't think I would end up using this one nearly as often as the campfire one, which has a more simple and consistent thing going for it. I think next time I need to do a better job of managing my goals and making some layouts beforehand to give myself a better idea of what to do so I'm not just working off the ever-changing deluge of experience that's going up on my brain. In the end, though, I think I did a pretty okay job considering the time and experience at my disposal. I'm proud of some of the technologically related stuff I did here, and I think the map dropping animation is legitimately excellent and worth the entire endeavor alone. I believe that aesthetically it could have done with a little more work, but I think the behind the scenes progress I made here is going to give me an edge moving forwards with this kind of stuff. Let's see. It feels like a superhero song, but it's about cats, and in particular this really stupid book series I've been getting really into recently called Warriors, which I've been like just, oh god, I can't stop reading these books, man. They're so freaking fun, and like they're dumb, but I love them. So yeah, this is called 3 of Them!